Did you know every map is shrinking Africa? It's been done on purpose for hundreds of years. And here's why. Now, when you look at a map, you may not think much of it. After all, it's just a tool to help us navigate our world. But maps can be incredibly misleading. They can hide the truth or even outright lie to you. And this is especially true when it comes to Africa. When you compare Africa to other continents, you might think it's roughly the same size as Europe or even smaller. But this couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, Africa is 3 times larger than Europe, even though on many maps it looks much closer to the size of the United States or China. So why are African countries shown as being so small on world maps? Well, it's because of something called the Mercator map projection. Introduced in 1569 by Mercator, this map was designed for navigation. It makes some countries look way bigger than they are. Let's take a close look at it. When you zoom in on Africa, you'll notice that it looks about the same size as Greenland. But wait a second, Greenland is over 2 million square kilometers. Africa is over 30 million square kilometers. That means Africa is 14 times larger than Greenland. Yet on this map, they look identical. Now let's compare this to Europe. When you zoom out, you'll see that Europe looks massive compared to Africa. It looks like Africa is only half the size of Europe. But let me ask you this, which one is bigger? Well, if you guessed that it was Europe, you'd be wrong. Africa is actually bigger than Europe. Again, this is because of how the Mercator map distorts the size of countries. If you were to draw a border around Europe and copy and paste it onto Africa, you would find that Europe is 3.68 smaller than Africa. But wait, there's more. If you took both continents together with their current borders, you would see that Europe is 2.78 smaller than Africa. And to really put this into perspective, if Europe was the size of a basketball, Africa would be the size of 27 of those basketballs combined. So why did they shrink Europe and blow up Africa on this map? Well, the answer might surprise you. You see, when Mercator created this map, he didn't do it to benefit Africa, but rather to benefit Europe. Back then, European countries were starting to explore and conquer new lands outside of Europe. They wanted to find new trade routes and claim land in the New World. But there was a problem. The maps that they used weren't very accurate for navigation. That's where Mercator came in. He created a new map projection that made it easier for sailors to plot their courses. This map was revolutionary at the time and quickly became the standard for navigation. But there was a catch. In order to create a map that was easy to use for sailors, Mercator had to make some countries look much larger than they are. And guess which countries these were? Not coincidentally, these were the countries that were doing the exploring and conquering. Countries like Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, and, of course, the Holy Roman Empire. By making these countries look bigger on the map, it gave them a sense of superiority. It showed them that their countries were more powerful and important than others. And this wasn't a mistake. It was by design. Mercator himself wrote, "I have represented the whole surface of the earth in such a manner that the shores of the most remote and scarcely known regions may be more easily discovered and distinguished, and that the course of each sea may be more plain and evident." Essentially, he wanted to make it easier for Europeans to navigate and conquer the world. And he accomplished this by making European countries look bigger and more important than they actually were. This map became the standard for world maps and was used for centuries. It was printed in school books, hung in classrooms, and displayed in globes. It was everywhere. And this meant that for generations, people around the world were shown a map that was full of lies. A map that made it seem like Europe was more important and powerful than the rest of the world. But why should we care? After all, it's just a map. Well, because maps have power. They shape how we see the world and influence how we think about different countries and cultures. For example, if you look at a map of Africa, you might get the impression that the continent is poor and unimportant. This is because on many maps, including the ones used in schools, Africa is shown as being much smaller than it actually is. Imagine if someone handed you a map of your country that was full of lies. They told you that your state was much smaller than it actually was. They probably wouldn't believe that person. Why should they? It's hard to trust someone who isn't telling the truth. Now imagine if your entire view of the world was based on this kind of misinformation. That's what Africans have had to deal with for centuries. It's no wonder that many Africans have come to believe that their continent is unimportant. After all, it's what they were taught for generations. This has led to what some call cartographic racism, the idea that maps can be used to promote racist ideas. When we look at a map of Africa that shrinks the continent, it reinforces the idea that Africa is less important than other parts of the world. It makes us think that Africa is small and insignificant when in reality, it is huge and full of life. It also makes us think that Africans are less capable and less intelligent than other people. And this is simply not true. Africa is home to some of the most brilliant minds in the world. But when you look at a map that shrinks Africa, it's hard to see yourself as anything more than a small and unimportant part of the world. It makes you feel like you're less than other people. But this is all changing now. People around the world are finally starting to realize that Africa is not as small as they were told. In recent years, there have been many efforts to fix this problem. In the 1970s, a German professor named Arno Peters developed a new map projection that accurately showed the size of countries. This map became known as the Gauss-Peters projection. However, the Gauss-Peters projection was not as easy to use as the Mercator map, which is why it didn't become popular right away. Many people, especially in the United States, were resistant to change. They were used to seeing the Mercator map and didn't want to learn a new one. Plus, the Gauss-Peters projection didn't make countries look as cool as the Mercator map. On the Gauss-Peters projection, Africa didn't look like a giant and Europe didn't look like a powerhouse. Instead, they both looked like regular continents. Despite the resistance, the Gauss-Peters projection has slowly started to become more popular in recent years. Some countries have even started using it in their schools. However, the Mercator map is still used more often than not because it's the one that everyone is familiar with. It's the one that we were all taught in school. It's the one that we see on TV and in movies. But things are slowly changing. More and more people are realizing that Africa is not as small as they thought it was. They realizing that Africa is a giant and that its people are just as important as the people who live in other parts of the world. So why do they keep shrinking Africa on every map they've ever drawn? Well, it's because of a map called the Mercator map projection. This map was designed to be easy to use for sailors, but it makes some countries look much bigger than they are, especially Africa. This map became popular during the Age of Exploration because it made countries like Portugal and Spain look bigger and more powerful than they actually were. This gave these countries a false sense of superiority and made it easier for them to conquer and rule over other parts of the world. For centuries, this map was the standard for world maps, and it was used in school books, classrooms, and globes. But now people are starting to realize that this map is full of lies. They realizing that Africa is not as small as it looks on this map, and that its people are just as important as the people who live in other parts of the world. So why do we care about this? Well, because maps have power. They can shape how we see the world and influence how we think about different countries and cultures. When we look at a map of Africa that shrinks the continent, it reinforces the idea that Africa is less important than other parts of the world. It makes us think that Africa is poor and unimportant when in reality, it is full of life and potential. It also makes us think that Africans are less capable and less intelligent than other people. And this simply isn't true. Africa is home to some of the most brilliant minds in the world. But when you look at a map that shrinks Africa, it's hard to see yourself as anything more than a small and unimportant part of the world. It makes you feel like you're less than other people. So what can we do about this? Well, first we need to be aware of the problem. We need to realize that the maps that we were taught in school are full of lies. We need to start using maps that show the true size of countries. And we need to teach our kids about the history of cartography and how maps can be used to promote racism. But it won't be easy. Many people, especially in the United States, are resistant to change. They were taught to use the Mercator map, and they don't want to learn a new one. Plus, the Gauss-Peters projection doesn't make countries look as cool as the Mercator map. On the Gauss-Peters projection, Africa doesn't look like a giant and Europe doesn't look like a powerhouse. Instead, they both look like regular continents. But this shouldn't matter. The size and importance of a country isn't determined by how it looks on a map. It's determined by the people who live there. So what is Africa like? Well, it's big, beautiful, and full of life. Africa is home to some of the most amazing places on Earth, from the pyramids of Giza to the Serengeti Plain. It's also home to some of the most intelligent and creative people on the planet. Africans have made incredible contributions to science, art, and culture, and this is only the beginning. Africa is a continent on the rise. It is home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world and it is playing an increasingly important role on the global stage. In short, Africa is a continent with a bright future ahead of it. But this future is being overshadowed by the fact that Africa is being shrunk on every map you've ever seen. So what can we do about this? Well, first we need to spread awareness. We need to let people know that Africa is not as small as they thought it was. We need to show them that Africa is a giant and its people are just as important as the people who live in other parts of the world. And that's why we started this channel. We want to show the world that Africa is not as small as it looks on the Mercator map. We want to show the world that Africa is a giant, and its people are just as important as the people who live in other parts of the world. So join us and let's rewrite history together. Let's rewrite history so that Africa is no longer shrunk on every map you've ever seen. Thank you for watching.